will bring us peace. You build your church when we walk in the fear of the Lord.
So last night you saw a quick slideshow breaking down some of the hours around our ministry, our time together, our worship, our sacramental life, all those pieces. That came really quickly and really fast last night, so we're going to break that down a little bit for you this morning. And our dear friend, John Stevens, will break all that down for you. So without further ado, if I could call Mr. John Stevens forward, that would be great. Everyone give him a grand welcome.
Get kind of started on our presentation, so if I can get my slides up. So this year we did something a little bit different. The bishop spoke about it last night. We saw a lot of the totals, we saw a lot of the hours, and we said, okay, the bishop is asking this question, Lord, where are you going? And he talked a lot last night about changing our self-understanding. We talked about looking in the mirror. Father Rob talked about the headless man, which was a bit of a letdown as a story, really. When you lead off with a headless man, I was expecting more, guts or something. Anyway, so it's fine. So it was all right. But the whole point was that we need to see ourselves. And so we came around to this process that we're going to follow over the next couple of years to be able to look at ourselves, maybe see again for the first time that we're old or not old, or that we have good and that we have areas that need improvement, and to try and work towards those to go where the Lord is calling us to go. And so our parish has really responded to that. You really responded to that. And so there's a lot of stuff that we can say about that. So when the bishop wrote his pastoral letter, he broke it into three major themes: mission, community, and formation. And of course, we're built this conference around the theme of mission and its subparts. But all these things work together. You can't have a mission kind of by yourself if you're not supported and sustained by a community. You can't have a mission that you just don't know what you're doing or what you're saying. You have to be formed and you have to be trained. So all of these things work together for us to accomplish what the Lord is asking of us. And so it's important to look at ourselves in all of these regards. And so it's just a quick breakdown here. All of you have read the pastoral letter from its entirety, all 18 pages or whatever, so I'm sure that you're familiar with this. But just in case, mission is broken down into three categories: about sharing Christ with others, about ministry to those in need, and reliance on the Spirit. Our community is measured by our sacramental life, our community life, our life together, and the systems and structures that hold us all together and keep us organized. They are important. And then formation for discipleship. The bishop touched strongly last night on the need for formation for leadership, and formation for service, those who serve the church in a particular way through all the various ministries that we have. So that's kind of what we were taking a look at this year. And why were we taking a look at it? The bishop talked about this last night, and this is actually from his pastoral letter. It says, what is being proposed here is a major shift in our present self-understanding and our self-expression as Catholic Christians. That's bishop talk for the way we need to change the way we think and the way that we do things. And I think it's pretty important, and pretty profound. I'll tell you, when I was a kid, I grew up Catholic, and I went to church every Sunday, and it was, kind of a thing that we did, and most people in our neighborhood did. Some people didn't go to our church, and I didn't really know what they did. It never really occurred to me till one day I slept over at a friend's house, and I ended up going to his church, and it was a Christian church, and I was really confused because I was in there, and in the back they had a balcony, but there were seats in the balcony instead of a choir and an organ. And the choir and the organ were in the front where, the altar should be. But the thing that perplexed me the most was there was no kneelers. And I could scratch in my head. I'm 11 years old or something like this. I don't really know what's going on in the world, right? And I turned to the guy's dad, and I'm like, where are the kneelers? And he kind of chuckles at me, Catholic kids. And, he just kind of laughs like I'm just making a joke or something because, I'm known for that. And I'm like dead serious. I don't know what to do. So I kneel on the floor. And I sit down, not to pray or anything, or kneel down, not to pray or anything, but just for an appropriate amount of time that my mother would be satisfied. And then I sit back up. And that was my self-understanding of Catholic, the way the furniture was laid out and what you did and those kind of things. And not all of us have that self-understanding. Of course, I've grown in, out, up, all those things over the years and kind of come to appreciate it. But we do need to, like the bishop said, to take a look at how we orient ourselves, how we organize ourselves around our mission to respond to that call in this present day, in this age and time that we find ourselves in, so that we can be faithful to what the Lord is calling. So this whole exercise is an exercise in self-understanding, which means we have to first look at ourselves and then, say, okay, what's next? So you did look at yourselves. I mean, I'm so proud of you. 54 parishes filled out ministry assessments. Over 1,000 people participated in the dead of winter. The winter we had this year, 1,000 people still trudged out to discuss in small groups and watch videos through our Lenten series. We have the 600,000 almost ministry hours that the bishop spoke about last night from almost 900 ministries across the diocese. Hundreds of thousands of hours committed to missionary activity, to community life and sacramental life, and to faith formation. We are doing a lot. And we are working towards the mission. And all we did was take a look and say, well, how are we doing with that? And we just kind of broke it down a little bit and said, this is how we're spending our time. We're spending our time in community, about half, a little over half our time. Spending our time in formation, in mission. And NA is not important. It's just they're the groups that are out there that do everything. Our Knights of Columbus, our CWL, our movements and ministries that are in every one of those categories. I could have put the work that they do, but it was so vast, they got their own category. They're that impressive. And so I guess the question then becomes, well, what does it look like when you start to break it down? And we looked at the mission and we said, well, how do we spend our mission time? So those hours that are spent in mission, 51% of those hours are spent on ministry to those in need, So about 26,000 hours to ministry to those in need. That's really impressive. And sharing Christ with others. And relying on the Spirit, praying for God to act in the world, to act in our lives, to act in the lives of the people that we know and we care about. You did a great job. But we could look at that a little bit more. And what we did was we asked some questions. We said, okay, what does it look like to talk about sharing Christ with others? Here's an interesting thing. I'm comfortable speaking about my relationship with Christ. 75% of the 1,000 people who filled out the survey agreed with that statement. I'm comfortable speaking about my relationship with Christ. I was surprised by that, to be honest with you. That is a great number. But then you see something weird happen. I regularly invite others to parish events and gatherings. Less than 50%, I'm open to new people and ideas. I'm great. 90%, Our parish is open to new people and ideas. 63%, and so we start to see some things where we can ask some questions, not judgments, not statements, but okay, if we're comfortable sharing our faith with others, and it looks like that we are, how come we're having trouble inviting? Is it because we don't know how? Is it because we don't have opportunities? Is it because no one's told us that we're supposed to? What are the reasons? And those are the things that we're going to delve into today. That's why there's workshops based around sharing Christ with others that are about invitation, that are about sharing Christ with others, that are about working together as pastors and lay people to accomplish the mission. And so we can start to see some things here that we're doing good stuff, but there are some questions that we can ask ourselves. When we look at the ministry to those in need, we know we're spending a significant amount of time doing this, but there's kind of maybe there are some places where we could look at ourselves and say, okay, why do people don't agree? Maybe they just don't know some of the stuff that we do. Did you know all the great things that we do? When I was reading through the ministry reports, I was shocked by all the wonderful things that people do. So maybe it's a matter of communication. Maybe it's a matter of pointing things out. Maybe it's a matter of drawing attention to things. We don't like to draw attention to ourselves. We like to just do the right thing because it's the right thing, but maybe they're out there. Or maybe there's a particular need in our community that's not being met that everybody kind of knows about, but we need to get at it. And so this afternoon, you're going to have workshops on ministry to those in need. We're going to talk about what does it look like to partner with community organizations? What does it look like to partner with global organizations? What does it look like to come alongside those people in our community who are suffering in various ways? And so those are going to be a really exciting round of workshops today, too. reliance on the Spirit. Are people, are we attuned? Are we trying to be attuned to what God is doing in our lives, and what God is doing in the church, and what God is doing in the world? And, I was really impressed by the faith of people, The people, you'll see in some of the other surveys, I pray every day is a very high agree number. And you see here, my personal prayer and worship, genuinely ask God's will to be done in my life. And I think, the prayer is happening, and how can we build on that? How can we grow in that to seek God's will in more places and trust, like Father Rob talked about last night, that God wants us to move from natural to supernatural and, create the conditions for that to happen. So today is all about reflecting on these questions and trying to come to some kind of place where we have a new skill or a new ability or a new way to look at an issue so that we can go back to our parishes and do even better some of these things that we're already doing. And we can look at community life, and I'm just going to run through these ones a little quicker because today's focus is on mission, but I still want you to see it. It's also all in your books, starting on page 11, all these charts and stats and things like that. So, but there's an interesting thing here when you look at community life, when you say sacramental life, 67% of our hours are spent on that. And the majority of that is the liturgy, making the liturgy happen, all the choirs, all the ministries, all the different people that are involved in helping our liturgies to happen every single Sunday. So we spend a significant amount of time, with the liturgy, and I think that's a good thing. And then the question is it supporting us, and is it firing us up? Is it giving us, are the sacraments giving the grace they're designed to give for us to be able to go and do our mission? That's the question that we can ask ourselves. I think in a lot of cases the answer is yes. So you can see how that breaks down there. One thing I really liked is 87% of people agreed that they know other parishioners by name and have friends who attend the parish. I think that's a fantastic thing because sometimes you get the sense that nobody really knows each other, and it seems like it's not true. So that's good. So how can we build on that? How can that warmth extend to more people? How can those relationships be spread to others? How can we look at ways to do that? Those are things we're going to be looking at over the next little while. And so you can see that people really are committed to the sacraments, that they respect the Lord's Day and keep it holy. They regularly gather to celebrate the Eucharist, that actively and consciously and fully participate in liturgical celebrations. I mean, you guys are doing it here today, singing Holy Smokes. You guys are amazing. And so on and so forth. But you can see that there's other places where we need to ask ourselves, are we not communicating properly? Are we not forming people properly? And so on and so forth. And here's an interesting thing, moving into community life, and I won't say too much about it, but the bishop spoke last night about mercy, and compassion. And mercy and compassion extends to others. We need to extend it to everyone we encounter in the world. And it extends also to us together, And you start to look at this and you go, our members willingly forgive offensive willingly and bear wrongs patiently. And a lot of people either agreed or didn't know, or disagreed or didn't know the answer to that. And, those are the kind of things, how do we become known for those things? Because if we're really about mercy and we're really about compassion, what makes our community life, our life together, look different than any other community organization? The bishop talked about mercy last night. Pope Francis, in his document that opens up the Year of Mercy, said that all of our institutions, all of our parishes in the Catholic world need to become an oasis of mercy. Because the world doesn't even understand the word mercy anymore. He said the understanding of the word mercy is waning, and we need to be a bigger example of it in our lives together. So how can we work together to do that? Is kind of a question that comes up in my mind. Pope Francis says mercy is the beating heart of the gospel. How do we exemplify that in our lives together? These are questions that we're going to look at over the next, coming times, coming assemblies, coming formation days as things go on. Our systems and structures, these are the necessary things we need to keep the stuff up around us and have places to meet and those kind of things. And I was actually pretty impressed overall with how those numbers shook out, that it wasn't the majority of our time. Sometimes I feel like I'm only ever at meetings, and that's just not the case, that a lot of work is happening out there in the world on a relative basis. Formation is interesting, and I got to give a little caveat on formation. It looks a little out of whack there. A lot of formation happens on the job, right? Like if you're a lector and you're involved in the lector ministry, somebody is teaching you, forming you how to do the readings at Mass, how to be a lector, right? Okay, good. And or if you're in a program and it has a particular job or something like that, like a small group leader or something like that, you're learning how to do it. So I think there's a lot of formation that happens in the context of ministry that wasn't captured in the way that we asked our questions. Discipleship formation, the vast majority of that big red piece of pie there is children's catechetics. Which is great because our children deserve to know the faith and have it passed on to them. But if you peel it back a little bit, that pie gets a lot smaller once you take away what's dedicated to children. So the question maybe becomes a little bit, what do we need as adults, as parents, as grandparents, as married people, as single people? What do we need to be able to be formed in to be able to accomplish our mission and go where the Lord is calling us to go? And so these are some of the questions that we ask ourselves. And you can see under leadership formation, the bishop spoke so strongly about it last night, that there is some need there to look at leadership, to look at ourselves and say, what do we need as leaders to be able to take on the task that the Lord is calling us to? And so we even tried to do that a little bit, even though this conference is about mission, you see that some of the workshops are dedicated to leaderships, to helping leaders grow in what they need to do and what they might need to do, to grow in, to be able to enable communities to be more supportive of the mission. So the bishop has proposed that we have a major shift in our present self-understanding and our self-expression as Catholic Christians. We took this year, and we're going to take the continuing years to continue to look at ourselves and say, what does that look like? What does that mean? But this is a lot of data, and this is a lot of charts, and this is a lot of info, and somebody has to be the geek. It was my turn this year, so I presented the stats. But what I thought I'd like to do is get one of our guests up here. He's given a couple workshops today. His name is Deacon Keith, and he's from the Archdiocese of Chicago, but he works in a parish as an evangelization coordinator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring him up here, and we're just going to have a little chit-chat. He just saw this information today for the first time like you, and he travels all over the country speaking about mission and evangelization and discipleship. And so we'll just have a chat and try to break it open in more plain language, more conversational language for the next 10, 15 minutes before you head off to your next round of workshops. So please welcome up Deacon Keith from the Archdiocese of Chicago. I don't know, do deacons have to sit on the right or the left? It's like they're an official thing?
To the right of a priest.
Okay. I'm not a priest. We're safe. Okay.
Why do I feel like this is going to become an episode of Talking to Americans right now with Rick Mercer? I'm a little frightened.
Well, we are having a little trouble with Peter Mann's bridge. We're trying to raise funds to repair it. That's a Rick Mercer joke, sorry. Boo. All right, and so let's just get the introductions out of the way. Deacon Keith, Archdiocese of Chicago. What else do you think people should know about you?
Oh my gosh. I'm married. I have a daughter named Sienna. She's 4.5 years old. I do travel around the country, technically the world, because I'm going to Canada now. So I'm an international speaker. And I work with the Catherine of Siena Institute, co-founded by Sherry Waddell, who wrote a book, Forming Intentional Disciples. And so I go around and teach and share with people about the love of Christ and about building and making disciples. So,
fantastic. So, we've had a chance to chat, leading into this conference and then looking at the stuff today and last night. I guess, what's your kind of first impression of what's going on?
First impression, you have some really foundational building blocks in place that many dioceses don't have, particularly in the United States. I'm not an expert on the church in Canada, but there seems to be a lot of foundation that you can build on. The question I always ask, and this is when I apply it to my own parish and also to at the diocesan level in places I go, given what you are doing, the real question that we have to focus on is, what is the fruit? What is the fruit of what we're doing? In the gospel, Jesus says that my Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and prove to be my disciples. And so fruit bearing is a condition of discipleship. And so when we take a look at ministry hours, and you have an incredible amount of ministry hours that you've done, the question is, how is that bearing fruit? How is our participation in formation bearing fruit? How is our service to those in need bearing fruit? Because you can spend a lot of time serving people in need and never bring Jesus into the equation. And the reality is that the church isn't just simply a non-governmental organization, that it's the body of Christ. And so those in need the things that they do need, but even more deeply, they need to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And so how do we propose that as we deal with their particular needs and their particular journey? So I always say, what is the fruit? Where's the fruit? And if what we're doing isn't bearing fruit, then maybe we need to take a look at what will bear fruit in the future.
What have you seen out there in the kind of the Catholic world that is bearing fruit?
Definitely, a lot of emphasis on small groups, which is really, really important. I think something like 56% of parishes, I think from that presentation, have discipleship-focused small groups, which I think is really, really good. You cannot mass-produce disciples. I mean, that's the reality. Churches are not disciple factories, that they actually happen in the context of small groups, which is what Jesus did. And I don't know how it is in Canada, but in the United States, we often have faith-sharing groups, which are different than discipleship-focused groups. In faith-sharing groups, people get together and they just talk about whatever they want to talk about, which is great, builds community, and they might give their input on something. But discipleship-focused small groups really focus on the growth in our relationship with Jesus Christ among all members. And so there's a focus on where was Jesus in your life this week? How did you share the gospel? What was your prayer life like? How did the Holy Spirit speak to you in Scripture? Those are really particular questions that we need to ask each other, and we need to hold each other accountable. And I think discipleship-focused small groups really do that. So those sorts of things, and evangelization events or processes like Alpha for Catholics, Discover Christ is another one. We have in the United States, I don't know if you have it here, Christ Renews His Parish, which is basically an evangelizing retreat with a small group follow-up. And so all of those things I think are beginning to make real headway in the life of the church.
So we got discipleship small groups, and we've got dedicated processes of proposing the gospel to new people or even existing people. What else, I guess, would you say just your gut reactions or initial impressions from what you're seeing and what you saw in the information?
Gut reactions. First of all, this is unlike any other diocesan gathering I've ever been to. This is sort of unique, which is really wonderful. The sense of passion and the presence of the Holy Spirit. So you have that going for you. I mean, all Catholic dioceses have it, but not many are comfortable with it. And so this is really kind of unique, I think, in my travels, which is good. Sad in one sense that this is the first time I've really encountered it this way, but good in that that's part of that foundation. I think the other piece is, the questions that we need to ask. You had 1,000 participants over, is it 54 parishes?
Yeah, from 54 parishes, and they met 3 times.
3 times. I think that's really, really important. But if you look at the breakdown, the average breakdown, then I don't really have 2 degrees in English, so I don't really do math very well. But you have probably on average something like 20 respondents from each parish. And I don't know how large your parishes are, but to me those seem to be smaller numbers, which this is the reality that we're facing. In the church in the United States, we do a Making Disciples seminar multiple times a year through the Catherine of Siena Institute. We've had thousands and thousands of Catholic leaders, bishops, vicars general, pastors, directors of religious education, directors of evangelization go through it. And we've always asked them, what percentage of your communities are intentional disciples of Jesus Christ? And in the United States, the average number is about 7.5% of communities are intentional disciples of Jesus Christ. Doesn't mean the other 92.5% are terrible people or not very nice. In fact, our parishes are filled with amazing, faithful, in that they come giving, loving people who just don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ. really because we have not done a good job proposing that relationship to our own. And that's really been a challenge. And so only disciples can do the work of a disciple. And what we often find in the work in our parish is that we are asking non-disciples to bear the load of a disciple. And then we wonder and worry, I don't know how it is here, but in the United States, usually after about 3 years, there's this tremendous amount of burnout in our ministries and among our volunteers. And if you're constantly seeing a cycle of burning out, often it's because we don't have disciples doing the work of disciples. So the critical thing to remember is that we can't pass on what we do not have. And so that's the intensity, I think, and the need for the new evangelization is to take a look at people who have already heard the gospel message, cultures that have already heard the gospel message, and find ways to reconnect those people with Christ. That's really the fundamental challenge. We can have all of the programs that we want. I think programs are good, but programs are only going to be as fruitful as the disciples who are running those programs. I think that's the challenge. And there's no silver bullet. And we are Catholics, so we love, like, what's the program? What's the thing that we can do to do this thing? What's the structure we can put in place, and then we know that it's all going? But the problem is there's no one structure, and there's no one structure that's going to work among all parishes. Every community is unique and will probably need a combination of things. But the most important thing besides the process, and I think fundamentally, is the people, the disciples. Have we called our own to discipleship, and then are we raising them up to leadership for others?
There's no one process?
There's no one process, no.
No one program?
There's no one program.
Okay, thanks, Keith.
You're never going to let me back in the diocese, no.
I thought you were... No, all right, so if there's no one process and there's no one program, are there at least some principles that might be effective in, discerning which we should be doing in our own place?
Yeah, I think there are. And actually, I looked at the workshops that you guys have the opportunity to take. And in fact, I'm going to slip into a workshop. I have a one-slot break, and I'm going into a workshop. I don't know which one yet, because they're all really good. I couldn't decide if I had to which ones I'm going to. And I think the workshops today are going to begin to help you do that. I think, just in terms of principles, the things that you want to look for is what will help people come to that experience of encounter with Jesus Christ, what will help people make a decision for Christ, and what will help nurture people once they've made that decision. I mean, those are the sorts of programs. I don't know, we have a program called Landings in the United States, which is for returning Catholics, One of the things that Sherry Waddell talks about in Forming Intentional Disciples is this pre-discipleship journey that people go on, and there are different thresholds that people are at. And the first threshold is trust. And a program like Landings does a really good job of reestablishing or establishing trust for Catholics who have left and who want to come back. But what it often doesn't address is that personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Most returning Catholics programs look to reestablish trust and then connect people with the community in some activity or in some way. It's good things, but this other journey of personal relationship has to be attended to as well. And so when we look at the programs that we bring in, those principles of encounter, entrusting ourselves to Jesus, helping people have a choice, and then nurturing that choice are really, really essential. And and you can have a program that's not that good and have really talented and very spiritually gifted disciples who will bring fruit out of that because they're cooperating with the Holy Spirit. So even the program isn't that important.
The program's not important.
Not that important.
Oh, not that important. Okay. Oh, this is fantastic, and we want to get people, make sure they get to their workshops on time and everything like that. But I had a question while you were talking, but I forgot it, but I have another one. What does a community, because one of our things was community, what does a community of intentional disciples, what does it look like? What is the fruit or the evidence that you might see?
So if you want to know what a community of intentional disciples look like, read Acts of the Apostles. Because we look at Acts of the Apostles sometimes and we see, I think sometimes a great moral lessons and things that we can sort of take away. But I look at Acts of the Apostles as a blueprint for how the church is supposed to live in the world. And so this sense of fruitfulness, it's not about numbers, it's about hearts, But, on the day of Pentecost, 3,000 were added to the church in one day. Well, when was the last time we added hundreds in our parish at all, and it's the same spirit. So, I think a community of intentional disciples looks like a community on mission. It looks like a community where people are expressing the love of Christ for each other in such a way that outsiders, people who are not Catholic, people who are walking by, are drawn in. And community of intentional disciples are disciples that are serving, serving in such a way that the people that they are connected with are experiencing the love of God, not just having a need fulfilled. And so we have small communities of intentional disciples within our larger parish communities. Oftentimes disciples will find themselves. It's like an underground network. I'm going to talk to you, we're going to go out to coffee because I can tell you about these things that I want to share with you, and everybody else in the parish will think I have 3 nostrils, but you're safe. And so if we magnify that out so that really we look like the early church in its fruitfulness, we'll see it in amazing ways. And vocations, this is the other piece. We like to say at the Catherine of Siena Institute that there's no vocation crisis in the church today, because God is still calling everybody. There's a crisis of discipleship. And so disciples long to hear the voice of the Good Shepherd. And so they will do what it takes to go through discernment to be able to hear where God is calling them. And so if we attend to discipleship, communities of intentional disciples take the lay vocation seriously, and also the vocation to religious life and priesthood and the diaconate. So Sherry Waddell talks about, there's a church in Michigan, Christ the King, and they have I don't know the exact stats, but it's like 1/3 of all of the priests in the Archdiocese have come from that parish. They had something like 30 vocations to the priesthood from the parish, and they've got 20 more in formation right now in seminary. It's really incredible. And they estimate that they have about 60% of their community are intentional disciples. They had a bishop come from India whose cathedral was damaged in a fire, and so he needed, I think it was something like $35 or maybe it was $60,000 to fix his cathedral. And so the pastor of Christ the King, they have 2 masses, and so they said, hey, we have a rainy day fund. How about whatever we don't collect here, we'll take out of the rainy day fund and just give to the bishop? And they all agreed unanimously that they would do that. And so they collected something like $15,000 that weekend, and then gave whatever the $35,000 that is remaining, or 45, I have 2 degrees in English. They gave it to the bishop, and then within 2 weeks, the rainy day fund was back up to full amount, because disciples give. And so this is what pastors like to hear, by the way. So if your pastor's not sure about discipleship, just say disciples give. And so all of those things happen when a community of disciples is unleashed.
Great. Well, maybe one last question then. The bishop talks about changing our self-understanding, changing customs and traditions and things that might make us comfortable. What do you read into that? What do you think some of those things are? What does a new self-understanding look like?
Wow. Where's Jim Beckman, the other guy from the United States? He could answer that.
He's still asleep.
I think it's fundamentally about identity. When this is the reality, the church does not exist for the sake of Catholics. We have to recognize that. It's not just about a place for Catholics to gather. Pope Paul VI said that evangelization is the grace and vocation most proper to the church. It's her deepest and most profound identity. So if evangelization is part of the church's deepest identity, then evangelization isn't what the church does, it's who she is. And parishes exist in the local communities that they are placed in, not for the sake of the Catholics in that area, but for the sake of everyone in that area. In the 1983 revision of the Code of Canon Law, pastors are canonically responsible for the well-being of every person within the geographical boundaries of the parish, whether or not they're Catholic. And the reality is that you and I bear that same responsibility by virtue of our baptism. And so we have to recognize that our parishes do not exist for just us. So if you have a parish in Sackville, right, that's just down the road, right, or up the road, I don't know. However many kilometers that is, I don't know. the parish in Sackville exists for the people in Sackville, not just for the Catholics in Sackville. So once we begin to have that identity, then we can recognize that, hey, this is who we are. We're not about being comfortable among ourselves. We're about going out. So if you have people who come to Mass at Christmas and Easter, for example, we call them Creasters in the United States, right? They're Christmas and Easter Catholics. That's the time when the parish should be its most welcoming. But in reality, it's the time when we're our least welcoming, because we're mad that these strangers have come and they're taking our parking spots and our pews. But a church that has a new self-understanding recognizes that that's the day to be most hospitable. So what if we actually said, you know what, regular parishioners, we're going to sit in the back half of the church, and then we're going to have a cadre of people at the door, and when people come who have never been there before or come once a year, we're going to welcome them and bring them right up to the front and give them the best spots, right? So, there you go. Always leave them with applause.
So basically, we have to flip out. We have to flip from being inward focused to being outward focused.
Outward focused. The Father said it last night, we're bridging this gap between Christendom, you know what I mean by Christendom, this kind of culturally reinforcing Christianity, which is all around, and it's acceptable to be Christian and it's reinforced. We're not there anymore. Especially, you know, in the United States. I can't really speak to Canada, but I don't think you're there either. And so now we're moving into an apostolic age. So an apostle is one who is sent out, and so we have to recognize that we have to go out. It's not enough to just gather together among ourselves. We have to go out where Jesus is most needed.
Well, thank you, Deacon Keith. Did you like what he had to say, I hope? Yeah?
Good. Praise God.
So just to wrap up, thank you for your attention. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your presence here. It's been really uplifting to me. All the statistics and everything that I went through are available in your books. Every parish has this same breakdown of hours and time and survey responses available to them. We sent it out to the parish priests and to the contact people this week. And what you'll find is your parish pie chart looks nothing like the diocesan pie chart. You know, because the diocesan pie chart is a conglomerate, it's an average, and so there are people who are really high in one area, people who are really low in another, and it kind of comes together the way it comes together. And what we really hope, as Deacon Keith alluded to, that since there's no one way to do things, you'll look at your own results, you'll look at your own pie charts, you'll look at your own selves, and say, okay, which thing do we need to do? You know, what principles, or how do we need to apply these principles in our particular place? And that's a really important distinction. I could make programs up or events up or things up based on diocesan averages, but they may or may not meet the real needs that you have on the ground in your place, right? So that's what we hope to also, or what we have given to you, is the ability to do that, to see the needs in your own place. That also means I can't just say, here, everybody do this, and all our problems will be solved. Unfortunately, we learned today there are no silver bullets. I was quite distraught. And so we're going to have to work slowly and carefully, taking the time to do it right, just like Alexander Keith, famous brewmaster. So, thank you very much for your time.
I will speak boldly in your name. I will speak boldly in your name. I won't hold back. I will proclaim.